What is up, everybody? It is Ed Gow Jr. I am hosting another great event put on by Dad Central, Canada's national fatherhood organization. I'm a member of the steering committee of Dad Central Ontario, and I'm very happy to be hosting another great online event. And big shout out right up to front to Dove Men Care for their sponsorship and support in Dad Central, and also these important online conversations. So today we're going to be chatting about how to stay calm, set limits, and get kids to behave. Now, we only have an hour, folks. So just know ahead of time, we only have an hour. We could spend a whole year talking about this. But let me give you a little backdrop. When kids misbehave or act out, yelling can sometimes feel like a very natural reaction. Research shows that not only is yelling at kids ineffective, but it can even have detrimental long-term effects on them. Despite our best intentions, calm parenting can sometimes be a real challenge to sustain. So today we are very blessed to have two experts, and I'm glad they're experts because they're going to get all the questions, not me, during this conversation. And first up, I'd like to introduce Sarah Rosensweet. She is a parenting expert, and she has 3 grown kids, and she has a really interesting concept called peaceful parenting. So welcome to the first time, Sarah. Thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule. Please share a little bit about yourself and also about peaceful parenting, because I think some parents want to know about that.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, Ed. Peaceful parenting is 3 main ideas. It is a focus on self-regulation, which basically means not yelling at your kids or worse. It doesn't mean we never get upset. It just means that we manage our own emotions so that we don't take them out on our children. It is a focus on relationship and connection, because that is really the only true influence we have over another person is our connection with them and our relationship with them. And it's a focus on using kind, firm limits to get kids to behave rather than using punishment or consequences. That's it. And that was more than 3 sentences, but that's
all right. Well. It all works. It all works. Fantastic. And I wouldn't be here without this gentleman that's on the screen. A number of years ago, we met, and he helped me find my passion, really and truly, to helping fathers and men. Brian Russell, a former director of Dad Central Ontario, a fatherhood expert, great father, and most importantly, just a great human being. So we're really happy to have Brian here today. Brian, how are things with yourself?
Great to be here, Ed. Thanks for the invitation. And just realized we're also sharing the same barber.
Yeah. Yes.
We think about passions we've got.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, and also everyone, well, you can see we had purple, all 3 of us, until a few moments ago, but Brian and I did not arrange to have purple sandwich in between Sarah. All right. So here we go. Yeah, there we go. We're making Prince proud today. That's a good thing. So, folks, please make sure you put your comments and questions in the chat. And what we're going to do is, if you have questions, please, we'll have them at the end of the conversation. We want to get through some of the topics with our friends, our guests today. So before we get right into it, Sarah, your background and experience when it comes to this topic about staying calm, setting limits, and getting kids to behave. Just some opening comments in regards to this important subject.
Well, I like to think about getting kids to behave rather than we're controlling them or making them do things. We're meeting the needs that would otherwise cause them to act out, right? So underneath every misbehavior is an unmet need. Kids, they'll just a common one, kids act out for attention sometimes. And I hear well-meaning people saying, well, if kids acting out for attention, ignore them, right? Like we don't want to reward negative behavior with attention. But if your child was acting out because they were hungry, you would never withhold food from them. They were acting out because they were tired. You wouldn't keep them awake, right? So really thinking about misbehavior as how can we meet the need that's driving the misbehavior. I think that's really a really helpful lens shift and perspective shift that I think can be really helpful for all parents and dads too.
Excellent. Thanks for those introduction comments. Brian, yourself, before we get into a deeper dive.
Yeah, kind of just thinking along the same lines as Sarah. The value of the relationship that we have with our kids is such a key thing when we're trying to think about what we call managing behavior. And I'd like to think about it more as developing that relationship and building trust with our kids, and kind of that two-way street of trust. And so whenever we're leading our kids, trying to guide their behavior, help them make better decisions, meeting their needs, like you said, Sarah, I think so much of it is, what's the type of relationship I have? And is that my big goal, to have that trusting relationship with them?
Excellent. Good stuff. Well, let's start talking about the real challenge, getting kids to behave. And I know we could, like I said, have a whole week conversation for this. Yeah. But I know people would get so screened out and stressed out. We were not going to go for a whole week. We're just going to go no more than an hour today, folks. But let's start at a high level, and let's get into some of the challenges that may cause parents to yell. So my first question for both of you is, from your perspective, what is or are the most important things dads can do to help kids behave? Who'd like to start off?
I will, sure, if that's all right, Sarah.
Sure.
Yeah, just a couple things. One is the modeling, right? Like, what am I doing with my own emotions? How am I handling the stress in my life? How am I dealing with things that with the relationships around me? What's going on at work? All that kind of stuff. So I think modeling is an important thing, because kids are learning probably a whole lot more from what they see in us than what they hear in us. So the more that they see, that actually shows me kind of managing my own stress levels, dealing with my own anger, being able to express my emotions in ways that are happy and healthy. And I think that really shows kids a lot of well, they learn so much from that, from what they see in us. So focusing on teaching what we want to see in our kids, not so much about what we don't want to see, I think is also another helpful thing. That's a bit of a perspective shift, like you'd mentioned, Sarah, just this idea of, are we more focused on building into our kids, or are we more focused on what we're trying to stop our kids from doing? And both are necessary, but I think dads can be focusing on being like, trying to figure out how to be really clear on, this is what I want out of my kids, what my expectations are, and clear with those things.
Okay. I love what you said, Brian, about modeling, because so often you see a parent yelling at a child to stop yelling, right? Yeah, or you know, will hit a toddler's hand to teach them not to hit, and it's really like, that's so backwards.
Yeah.
Nice. When I want to ask about this point right now, about accepting the children where they're at, especially during these times. How much does that come into our conversation today?
You know, I think a really big sort of another mindset shift, if you can handle another one, is that kids are doing the best they can. And I believe that wholeheartedly with parents too. Like, we're doing the best we can. Our natural state is to be close and connected with our loved ones. And if we're acting out of alignment from that, then there's something else going on. So I think that's really speaks to like meeting kids where they're at. Like, they're having a hard time. They're not giving us a hard time. And if we can just try and reframe their behavior, and that, you know, they're not acting bad because they want to be little jerks, right? They're acting bad because something's going on with them. They're, you know, maybe missing their friends and, you know, not being able to go to school, or school looks different. You know, the words virtual kindergarten should not ever be together in the same sentence, right?
Yeah.
So I think if we can do that, meet them where they're at, and really understand that they're having a hard time, they're not giving us a hard time, that can help us be so much more patient. Like, that's almost 50% of the not yelling, right? Was if you can be more patient and compassionate, it helps you calm yourself down.
Brian, anything you want to add to that conversation piece?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how sometimes if we're accepting them where they're at, then we're looking at life from their perspective, as opposed to kind of forcing them into our perspective of what life should be. And so I think that just takes pressure off of them, because if my parenting is focused on my kids better be who I think they should be, then actually I'm parenting for me. I'm not parenting for them. And so accepting where they are it gives them more freedom to be able to kind of just be themselves, and not to live with a kind of a heavy expectation of what I might want from them.
Okay. So it sounds like a relationship that dads have with their kids building daily connection time and setting clear and healthy limits is the foundation of getting kids to behave. Yes, there are other factors, but some of those factors may be out of a dad or parent's control. What do you have to say in regards to that? For those things that are out of their control. And I'm going to play the devil's advocate. Even though you do all those things, kids can still act out and possibly drive once in a while parents crazy. So in those moments, it's hard for parents not to yell.
Remember how I said it? Self-regulation doesn't mean that you never get upset. There is not a parent in the world who never gets upset with their kids. It means, what do you do with that upset? Like, can you learn those self-regulation strategies to calm yourself when you are upset? Frankly, yelling often does work, right? Like with quotes, if you're just listening to this, because kids are so scared that you're not going to love them anymore, that they move really quickly to do whatever it is that you're asking them to do. But what the studies show, when kids are yelled at, even, the beautiful thing about science now is that science can back up so many things that we might feel in our hearts, but actually it's like cold hard science that when you yell at a child, even if they have their faces completely blank and they look calm on the outside, their cortisol and stress levels are completely elevated and their blood pressure is spiking. So even if they look calm, it's still affecting them on a very deep level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Brian, anything you want to add to that?
Nope. I think no. That's good.
Okay. Nope.
Good.
So, and also too, what about dads who come from a family of yellers?
Yeah. Well, I guess that sort of speaks to how easy it is to learn how to yell. Like if we grow up seeing that, well, my dad yelled at me, he got my attention, and so that's what I then learned to do. And so sometimes what in the midst of kind of this self-regulation, like you were talking about, Sarah, there, it's also having to relearn or unlearn some things that have popped up over the years, because that's kind of all we know. We don't know anything different. And so that takes a lot of honest look at ourselves, I think, and some real risk in some ways to be able to look a little deeper at ourselves and say, how did I learn what I'm doing here? And what's it going to take to kind of unlearn that, get some new skills, look for some other ideas. But I guess that part of it is that the struggle, I think, is not that parenting is not just a skill. It's not just, hey, learn something new and everything will be okay. There's an art to being a parent. There's a heart to being a parent. And so it's really changing some of that stuff too, so that when we do kind of provide a skill or do something that's different, it's coming from a heart that's already ready to do that. Mm-hmm. And that takes time to do that, but it also takes, but it's such an important thing, I think, too.
Anything to add on to that?
Well,
Sarah?
I mean, to Brian's point, whenever I work, my main job is a parenting coach. So I work directly with parents, supporting them so they can support their kids. And around the second or third session, parents are always like, wow, this isn't really even about my kid, is it? This isn't about me.
Ding, 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 ding.
So that's the big secret of coaching, right? People come because they want to fix their kids, but then they realize it's what they're bringing to the relationship. It's what they're bringing to those heated moments. I can give you 20 strategies to get your child to brush their teeth when you ask them to brush their teeth. But if you get completely, triggered when they run away from you, when you're trying to get them to come and brush their teeth, it's a different set of strategies that you need, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that takes a lot of transparency for us as parents to be just willing to kind of walk into those sort of things and make those changes. It's not easy, but it's important.
Yeah.
And I pick up especially what you said, Brian, about, where do we learn to be a parent? Like most of us are just thrown into it. So a lot of times we're just learning inch by inch or centimeter by centimeter, minute by minute these days in regards to the parenting. So just want to encourage, if people have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat section. I see we have one here and we will certainly get to it. But if you have any more, please feel free to share in regards to this. So, and I know, Sarah, you mentioned a little bit a few moments ago in regards to what happens to a child when they're yelled at. Can you go a little bit deeper, and maybe Brian, you may want to add on to that? What happens to children when they're yelled at?
Well, I mean, I'd love to hear what Brian has to say about this too. But what I find, I love what Brian said about the relationship is so paramount that, and as I teach, it's the real influence that we have. And anyone who has teenagers or who remembers being a teenager knows that that's really the only influence we have over our kids as they get older. We can't control them anymore. We can try, but it will backfire. And really they have to care what we think. Like, that's what my son said to me once when he was about 16. He said, "Mom, you don't understand how lucky you are that I care what you and Dad think." Right.
Oh.
And that's he was comparing to his friends who, didn't go home at night and didn't tell their parents where they were going. And having kids who care what you think is so important, especially as they get older. And the yelling bit is every time think about what it feels like for us if someone yells at us, right? Like, if someone yells at you, it really hurts your relationship. And yes, you can repair. It's not like anyone listening here, if you've been a yeller, I'm not saying, "Oh, you're over, it's done, game over," because you can always heal and repair. And kids, it's never too late. But yelling really does hurt your relationship. And as I said, your relationship, and as Brian said, that's really the only thing that we truly have to influence our children. So when you yell at a kid, they have to build up some defenses, right? Because we're sensitive creatures. So you yell at someone a lot and they're going to stop caring what you think because it's too painful. I know I sound dramatic, and I don't mean to sound dramatic, but I think it's truth.
I think, no, Sarah, it's true. You're speaking truth to power. So you're being honest and you're being real here. So I know that everyone appreciates that. Brian?
Yeah, I think kind of carrying on with that, Sarah, some of the thoughts are just, I think shame is something that really gets triggered in kids when they get yelled at. And so the emotional, you talk about pain, like the emotional pain, I think a lot of it is a sense of shame. And what shame is kind of I don't like who I am. Mm-hmm. I have no value myself. Guilt is feeling bad about what I do. Shame is feeling bad about who I am. Like, what parent wants their child to feel bad about who they are? Like feeling that kind of shame. And so I think yelling really starts a path of that kind of thing for kids. And I think out of shame, then two things can happen. One, those kids can withdraw, nothing, like they isolate themselves, they kind of turn in on themselves, or they attack. And they kind of get angry themselves, and they become angry kids. And so, I agree with you, Sarah. Like, but this is never a hopeless situation, right? Like, like we don't want any parent to feel like, oh man, it's too late. It's really never too late. But I found it helpful with my kids as when they were younger too, just to think about. My relationship with them, is it building shame or is it building character and building strength in them? And so I think yelling is one of those things that leads kids to wonder, do I really matter? Mm-hmm. And we don't want kids to be feeling that way or believing that kind of thing about themselves, but it's all about defense. Like, they get hurt and then they're going to protect themselves somehow, either by withdrawing or by kind of, attacking them in some way.
Sorry, can I just jump in
there?
No,
absolutely. Go ahead,
please. I love that Brian brought up shame, because and in my definition of shame, very close to yours, which is that I feel unworthy and unlovable, right? And for kids, like, when they feel shame, it's like the person I love most in the world, my mom or my dad, thinks that I'm unworthy and unlovable. And the interesting thing that I find in my work with parents is that the reason why parents are yelling is because they're feeling shame, right? And you mentioned the lashing out. When, I don't know if you said lashing out, but that's how I always think of it, that response of when we feel shame, we feel overwhelmed, it feels terrible, it feels like we're going to die. And we have that emergency response of the fight, flight, or freeze, the withdraw or lash out. And often, I know it's going to sound silly, but your kid's defiant with you. And you start to feel terrible inside, like, I must be a bad father, I must be a bad person. And it's that shame feeling, and everyone has different shame triggers, but let's say defiance is a trigger for you, because you feel like your child's being defiant. It's like they're saying you don't matter, right? So it's that shame trigger that comes up that causes the yelling. And then you've got this whole cycle of intergenerational shame happening.
Yeah. I can say a very good point about the intergenerational. I think it's a very, very, very key point in regards to parenting. I think that's a whole webinar in itself. So we're gonna steal that and may have to bring you back to be part of that, because I think it's a very key point. Reg, Sam, and Patrick, I see your questions. We will get to them, but actually in our set of questions, Sam, your question is going to get addressed. So I'd like to ask our experts here, how would you advise or coach a dad who finds themselves yelling more than they want to? And it's sort of piggybacking on what Sam is saying. I know yelling is bad. What's the alternative? Or how can I calm down myself down or be calm or prevent myself from yelling? So we'll address that question now for you, Sam. Either one of you?
I just talked. You go ahead, Brian. We'll take turns.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think, again, for me, this is a bit of the balance of what's my skill with what's my heart attitude, like what's going on deep inside of me. So like Sarah was saying, do I understand my shame? Do I understand how my shame is motivating me or my needs? And I think a lot of times our yelling too will come from I, as a parent, as a dad, somehow my expectations not getting met, or I have a need not getting met. And so then I yell, because yelling is how I get that done. I get my need met by yelling. And Sarah, you're mentioning that. So I think and that's not a quick answer or a quick way to deal with some of the things around yelling, if that's something we struggle with. But I think it is such an important thing to be really focusing on what are my expectations of my kids. And a lot of times those are kind of unwritten rules, like things like I should always be respected, or nobody should ever turn away from me when they're talking. Like, we might not consciously think those things, but it's those unwritten rules that we have that sometimes we don't even know, but those are the things that are motivating how we respond to people and what's coming out. So I know that's kind of that's the longer journey, I think, in some of this for us as parents. Sarah, I don't know, you might have other thoughts too around.
Well, I have, I could give you an extremely detailed response of how to stop yelling, because I actually have an e-course about it, an inexpensive e-course, if you ever want to share that with your people about how to stop yelling at your kids.
Sure.
And to what Brian said, and he didn't use this word, but I think part of it is figuring out what your triggers are, right? And everybody has different triggers. So what I teach is, in the moment, we use stop, drop, and breathe. So I can just explain that real quick if you want, because I think it's a good.
Sure, absolutely.
So if you find yourself either already full-blown yelling or feel like you're about to yell, and at first when somebody's trying to stop yelling, usually you stop yelling. Usually you don't stop yelling until you can, I'm getting my words all twisted up. Usually when you're trying to stop yelling, you will have to stop in the middle of a yell because it's hard, right? It's a hard habit to break. So you find yourself yelling, you just realize, oh no, I'm yelling. I don't want to be yelling at my kids. So you just stop, you can clap your hand over your mouth or shut your mouth, turn away. That's the stop. The drop is drop your agenda. So your agenda, and often we yell because our agenda is in opposition to our child's agenda. Like, we want them to go to bed, they want to stay up. We want them to stop playing and come to dinner, they want to keep playing. When you think about it, 95% of the day, probably we have these opposing agendas. So drop your agenda just for a minute. Doesn't mean you're going to give up on trying to get them to come to the dinner table, but just to calm yourself down, just drop your agenda just for a minute and breathe. This breathing is a signal to our bodies and our brains that it's not an emergency, and we're yelling because we feel like it's an emergency, right? Our brain can't tell the difference between a real emergency and a perceived emergency. So just even if your dads could walk away with this stop, drop, and breathe, it's a great start for interrupting that that habit that we talked about. That's you were raised by yellers, you're definitely going to have that brain patterning to yell when it feels like an emergency. Or if your kids, historically only listen to you when you yell, it's going to be a habit. So just that stop, drop, and breathe. And then figuring out, okay, what are the situations in which I yell? What can I do about it? If there's anything I can do about it externally, or if it's something that I need to work on, like maybe defiance is my trigger where I start yelling, how do I work on those feelings that come up for me when my child is defiant? So yeah, that's the basic crash course in stopping.
Beautiful. Right there, anyone who's watching this live on the replay, just that last 2 minutes right there is worth it.
That's gold right there. Yep.
Right there, because not only is it, and so I really appreciate that, it's not only good with parents dealing with children, it's with adults dealing with each other. So it's a great universal principle.
Yeah, all of the parenting strategies that I teach and practice are really just relationship strategies. Like it's just how you are in relationship with other people.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I sometimes wonder too if there's moments that we should be saving our yells for. Like there are moments we need to yell. My kid's about to run across the street.
Yes.
I want to get their attention. Stop. Right. I want it. And so if they are so used to yelling, because that's kind of the common thing, then it's actually going to get harder and harder to get their attention when you really need it. And I think the yelling, if it ever has to happen, has to be about safety.
100%.
And because you want them, like, like you're saying, Sarah, we want to stop, drop, and breathe. They're about to run across the street. I want to get their attention so that they stop. And they're saying, my dad's got my best interest in heart. I'm going to listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't hear that very often. I don't hear that yelling. Like this is new and different. So, are there times to yell? I think there are, but I think it's when we really need their attention, and it's going to basically be about safety.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
That kind of context.
Anything you want to add?
Just one more thought about kind of what do we do with the coaching, and I think the repair is really important too. So if we do yell, how do we repair that with our kids? How do we go back, apologize for that, ask their forgiveness, like just work through that with them so that there's warmth in the relationship despite the fact that there's been yelling. So just look for ways to repair.
Yeah.
I like to tell kids, to tell parents to tell kids, and I've said to my own kids, you never deserve to be yelled at. I'm really sorry I yelled at you. You don't deserve to be yelled at, and I'm working on, my own emotional regulation.
Nice.
And
as we said at the beginning, folks, we could spend just an hour on that. We could just right there. But thank you for giving both you really good, valuable information and suggestions. So I want to chat about, talk about more about empathy and emotion coaching. And I think we were getting down that highway with what you've just recently shared. What does that mean? Because from an average dad's perspective, that sounds like a little warm and fuzzy. Not something many dads might not want to, or might not know to embrace. So could either of you just expand on the empathy and emotion coaching when it comes to this subject in fathers?
Sarah, I think I'll let you take that one first.
Okay. So we all want our kids to be resilient, right? Resilience is so important. It's such a predictor in success in life and happiness in life. And I think there's this old definition of, and I promise I'm coming back to emotion coaching, Ed. Yep. I think there's this old definition of resilience, which means that you never get upset, right? Stiff upper lip, you're tough, nothing ever bothers you. But truly resilience is that you recover from difficulty, disappointment, frustration. That is true resilience, is that you experience those really difficult emotions and you can recover from them, right? So teaching our children that emotions are not dangerous, they're not to be avoided, crying is okay, that getting through those difficult feelings, rather than what a lot of people do, which is this like, suck it up, buttercup, you're crying because your ice cream fell on the ground, suck it up. Right? Because I think that's very well meaning. I think a lot of, and I'll say this is maybe like a little bit too general, but a lot of dads especially are more of the suck it up buttercup, right? They tend to want their kids to don't get upset about these small things because they want them to be resilient, right? They want them to have great and happy lives. It's not because they're bad people. But also I think that that's how they were raised. Like a lot of, our culture in general has a lot of trouble with emotion, especially for men, right? Especially boys learn at a very early age that they're not, even if their parents aren't telling them you shouldn't cry, there's a cultural expectation that boys don't cry, right? And I hope that's changing. But I think that really emotion coaching is welcoming feelings. So your ice cream cone fell on the ground. Oh my goodness. Oh, I'm so sorry. Your ice cream. Oh, you love ice cream so much. And, maybe you're gone far away from the ice cream stand and you can't get another ice cream or whatever. And just welcoming those feelings, letting your child cry because their ice cream cone fell on the ground. And of course, yes, it's a small problem on the scale of things. But little kids have little problems, and helping, it's appropriate for their suffering to be over an ice cream cone falling on the ground, right? And as they get bigger, the problems get bigger. But this is where they're learning resilience, is when we say, this is really hard. This is really sad. And I'm going to welcome those feelings because I know you can handle it. We're not actually saying those words to them, but we're responding to them in a way that doesn't act like feelings are an emergency that we have to stop, right? And that's what the suck it up buttercup is. No room for feelings. Stop feeling that way. And that actually hampers that emotional intelligence and emotional growth and resilience. So sorry, that was a bit long-winded, but
no, that's
like welcoming feelings is what teaches kids that feelings aren't an emergency, which is what gives them the ability to recover after difficult feelings, which is what resilience is. That was the short answer.
No, that's good. No, and before Brian adds that, I really love how you said welcoming feelings.
Yeah.
Welcoming feelings.
Yeah,
Brian?
I think sometimes those welcoming our own feelings as dads can sometimes be hard. And so if we can't welcome our own, it's going to be really hard to kind of welcome our kids' feelings too. So I mean, it is great. Like, even if I might be confused in a moment, I might not know exactly how I feel, and I'm just confused at the moment. But if somehow I can acknowledge what it must be like for my child to have dropped that ice cream cone, man, that must be so disappointing. Like, just acknowledge something like that. So and a big piece of that is, can I kind of resonate with my own feelings around those kind of things, or just anything that I go through. So empathy is one of those things that's modeled, I think, as kids watch us respond to them in empathy. And it's a way, I think, too, that trust is really built. So when I'm empathizing with them, when I'm acknowledging and kind of addressing that this is how you must be feeling, or tell me how you're feeling, or whatever the way is that we're welcoming it, that's inviting our kids to trust us and say, well, this guy can handle what I feel. And that's a safe place for my child.
Can I add one thing about empathy that I think is really important? That you don't have to agree to empathize. So your child might be really upset about something, and you can't think, oh, gee, how would I feel if somebody cut my muffin in half when I didn't want my muffin cut in half? Kids will like have meltdowns over things like that. But that if we stop and think, like, what's the feeling that's underneath? Like, if you cut their muffin in half, they're feeling powerless because they can't fix their own food or choose what to eat, or misunderstood because they thought you knew they wanted the muffin whole, or whatever it is. So both remembering that you don't have to agree with someone's emotional reaction to empathize, is just acknowledging their point of view. So it might not be a big deal to you, but it is to them. And also, if you're finding it hard to empathize, try and think about what's underneath the situation that you might have felt before, like you felt powerless before, or you felt misunderstood before, and then you can really connect. Because empathy isn't just saying the words. I have so many parents that I work with, they'll say, well, what did you say when that happened? And they'll say, well, I said, gee, you must be really upset about this. And I said, well, what were you feeling? And they're like, I was actually really frustrated and pissed off, right? So it's not like the words that you say, it's that, like, being able to feel with somebody. And so those are just two quick tips to try and, try and be able to empathize. Because as Brian said, empathy is so, so important.
Yeah, and I agree. I like what you said there, Sarah, about the empathy does not mean agreement necessarily. Like, we don't have to agree.
That's right.
And I think one of the things, just recognizing that I can understand you without agreeing with you. And so one of the big goals, I think, in empathy is for kids to feel understood by their dad. Whether I do understand my daughter or not, might not be there. I might not really get where she's coming from. But if she feels understood by me, that's gold, right? Like that, because then that's where she's engaging with me. This guy's got my back. He might not agree. He might not like what I'm saying, but he understands me. Then they can walk away from a relationship like that just feeling very, very secure. And therefore carrying that on to other people in their relationship.
I was going to say, pro tip, like, this is something that's really helpful in, like, romantic relationships too, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's been my journey with my husband. Like, he gets upset about things that I would never get upset about. And I used to say, like, this was not a big deal. How can you be getting upset about this? And now I've learned, like, well, it might not be upsetting for me, but it's upsetting for him, right?
Right. Yeah.
Wonderful. We're having a great conversation here, folks. Again, put your comments, questions in the chat. We'll get to them when we finish our flow here. So next conversation piece, what about the consequences? Talking and having kids share emotions is great. That's fantastic. But when they really get out of line, don't dads need to keep healthy boundaries by using consequences? What are your thoughts?
I think when we think consequences, we all go back into our own childhood and think, man, that wasn't a good thing, right? Like, because the difference between punishment and consequences is something that we need to be kind of trying to understand. Because, maybe as a child, I'm an adult now, but maybe as a child, I was spanked, I was hit with a belt, something like that. Like that was the consequence was this is what you get. And so I think again, it's some of the learning out of where we've come from, but what consequences are. But I think too, one of the other sides the other ways that might go is that we might start to believe that consequences aren't good, right? Like my child should not have negative consequences. And I think, I'm not sure if that teaches our kids good things, if there's no consequences. So
can we differentiate between natural consequences and consequences that are a punishment?
Yeah. How would you do that? Yeah.
So natural consequences happen without any parental involvement. So if you forget your coat, then you're cold, right? That's a natural consequence. But people today, when they talk about like there's going to be a consequence for that, what they usually mean is a punishment. But I think that I think the word punishment sounds harsh in our brains, so we use the word consequence instead. And I recognize that the peaceful parenting approach is not the mainstream approach, but we don't recommend that we use any punishments or parental consequences in raising kids. It doesn't mean that kids aren't in charge. It doesn't mean that, if your child is hitting their brother with a stick, you're going to take the stick away, right? Because you don't want your kid to like hit your other kid with a stick.
Yeah.
But you're not. What makes a consequence or a punishment is that intending to teach a lesson through making a child feel bad. So if you don't, if you do this thing, I'm going to make this bad thing happen to you so that you won't do the thing anymore, right? Whereas a limit in peaceful parenting, we talk about limits as what we need to do sometimes to support our expectation of our child. So your, expectation that your kid not hit your other kid with a stick, yeah, you're going to take the stick away, but you're not taking it away to make them feel bad. You're taking it away to support the limit or your expectation that they not hit the other child. So, there's tons and tons of research about why punishments don't work in the long run, and why they don't have kids develop like intrinsic motivation to do the right thing. They might do the right thing, but it's to not get in trouble, or to not have their parents angry at them. They're not doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do. So, again, another webinar topic. I could talk for hours and hours about punishment. But really, like I would encourage dads, if they are, if you want a good book, also written by a dad, about why not to use punishment in parenting. It's called Unconditional Parenting by Alfie Kohn. And it's a very research-backed book. Do you know that book, Brian?
Not that book. I've heard of the author, but
Alfie Kohn, yeah. Very research-driven about why punishment doesn't work in the long term. And again, back to the relationship. If you perceive your parent is doing something to make you feel bad on purpose, it's going to hurt your relationship with them. Yeah. So I always get parents to think in terms of, okay, natural consequences. You throw a toy in anger against the wall and it breaks. The natural consequence is that your toy is broken, right? We'll then need to take away all the children's other toys because they threw their toy and broke. They're going to learn enough from their experience that they don't need us to pile on with something else, right? Anyway, sorry, I get a little passionate about.
No, it's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead, please. Because you're sharing valuable information. So please share from your heart, because I know you care.
Yeah, my kids have never. Somebody said, I saw this thing on Facebook. Ask your kids what they would have to do to get in trouble with you, and I asked my kids who are 13, 16, and 20. What would you have to do to get in trouble? And they literally couldn't understand the question. They were like, "What?" Mm-hmm. Like they've never been in trouble in their lives, and they're not perfect people, but we always went to it as how can I help you with this problem that we're having? I might be unhappy with something that you've done, but you're not in trouble. right? You're not going to get a punishment. Like we're going to work out a repair. We're going to work out prevention for the next time this situation comes along. But it's really thinking about the relationship, and also, as I said in the beginning, like what is the need that's driving this behavior?
Nice. Brian, anything you want? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say one more thing about punishment. Punishment teaches kids to lie and sneak. Like if they're afraid that something bad is going to happen to them if they make a mistake or a bad choice, they're going to try and hide it. The last thing you want is a teenager who gets themselves into a difficult situation and they're afraid to call you because they're afraid they're going to get in trouble, right? They're going to get grounded. They're going to get their phone taken away. They're going to not use the car or whatever. You want your kids to come to you when they're in trouble, come to you when they need help or have made a mistake, and know that you might not be happy with them, but they're not going to be in trouble and they're not going to be punished, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think too. I love everything you're saying there, Sarah. Absolutely. I think the idea of consequence is it's become almost a hard word to even think through. And then I think too, sometimes as dads, we'll be thinking, well, life has consequences, right? Like if I give my child a consequence, they're kind of learning how to manage life when they're an adult too, because I have consequences. If I don't show up from work, what happens, right? I don't get paid. But that's one of those things that usually as an adult, we're running into natural consequences. Unless we're actually outright breaking the law. Most of our life, if I do something that kind of messes things up, it's a natural consequence. Like something I just have to do because of that. So I think a couple things that I find helpful thinking about how to kind of guide behavior is to make sure kids expect they kind of know what the consequences might be. Because sometimes I think it can really jar them if suddenly something happens and they're suddenly given this consequence out of nowhere, out of the blue. They had no clue that this was even going to be something that was a result of whatever their behavior was. So trying to keep it like as much as possible, they would expect something to happen if there's going to be some kind of consequence, and keeping it really relevant too. Like if they break a rule on Monday, to say you don't get a movie night on Friday, that doesn't matter, right? Because it's not close in time. It's not relevant to them anymore. So if we do have to have some kind of consequences, I think we've got to do it where kids, one, they're not shamed by it, like you were saying, Sarah, and two, it has to make sense. There's got to be a logic in it to them that you spilt the milk, you're cleaning up the mess. Like, it just makes sense. It's not you spilt the milk and therefore you're losing dessert. Those
right.
really aren't related.
So that's a repair, though, right? You spill the milk and then you clean up the milk.
Yeah.
I guess I would argue even that, you do something on Monday and you don't get movie night on Friday. Yes, okay, it's far away. But really, what does movie night have even anything to do with whatever you've just done, right? Like that's just
it's not relevant.
Old-fashioned, using the stick to try and get kids to change their behavior. But really, like, kids don't need to be made to feel bad to learn something, right? We don't even need consequences. Like yes, natural consequences will happen. And those are great ways to learn. But if a child makes a mistake, we just have to help them with whatever their mistake was, or if they made a bad choice, like feeling bad about it doesn't need to be part of the equation, right? Like, and it's so, I know this is a real big paradigm shift for a lot of people who are watching, but we really, really don't need to make people feel bad to teach them. Like, if you made a mistake at work, do you need your boss to like dock your pay for you to understand the mistake you made? Or need your boss to take you aside and say, hey, listen, I know you've been under a lot of stress lately with the kids being at home and, trying to work in virtual school. Like, what happened there? Like, let's talk about it, right? So there's always a way to teach. If you think the child hasn't learned from whatever happened, there's always a way to teach that doesn't involve shaming and consequences.
Yeah.
Nice. Let me ask before we get into our questions from the audience, how about disciplining, matters of discipline or means of discipline with kids of different age groups? Because Sarah, a great example, you have 3 kids, different ages, and Brian too. You have children. How do the fathers manage the discipline when it comes to children of different age groups?
I just think about discipline as meaning teaching, right? Like that's the root of the word. and you teach according to what they need to know for whatever age they're at.
Yeah, I agree. I think about discipline as being, it's kind of instilling self-discipline. Like if I have a trusting relationship with my kids, so that suddenly when I'm not around, they're going to make choices that kind of, I know that they're going to make good choices because they're learning self-discipline. And so my goal has to be that kind of thing. So, and regard, like you're saying, Sarah, that's sort of the art of this. That's where this is about the relationship primarily. Mm-hmm. It's not about a skill or specific things at specific ages. It begins with what's your relationship like with your kids, and how are you growing that and building trust that way.
Well, and there are different limits that you need to set for kids at different ages. You know, sure. My 13-year-old has a 90-minute limit on her phone. And she needs that because she doesn't have the self-discipline yet to do her homework instead of her phone if she had unlimited time on her phone, right? So as kids get older, they need fewer limits from us. But kids do need limits when they're younger to help them develop that self-discipline that Brian was talking about.
Okay, fantastic. So we've got a few minutes left for some quick questions. So looking from the audience here, I hear Reg just got a question here. How does a dad help kids transition from the other parent's home when expectations are not consistent in the other household? So maybe what Reg is asking, you have a blended family or kids from two different homes. How do you manage the discipline aspect if in one home it could be one way, the other home it can be the other way?
You go for that, Brian. I have a couple thoughts, but I'm not a big expert on co-parenting.
Well, I don't know if I have super clear answers on that either, because it's not an easy situation, right? Really what it comes down to. And what would be best is if those two parents could talk and kind of set the expectations, make sure that they're looking out, number one, for what's best for the kids. And they've got to work together as parents, even though they're not in the same house, they're not together, but they're still co-parenting. And so I just try to make those ways for those parents to look at what's best for the kids and how can we agree on those kind of things.
Okay, Sarah?
The other thing, I think if you can't agree with Brian, like 100% best to have similar expectations at both parents' houses. But if you can't or you don't, I think kids are pretty resilient in that they can adjust to different expectations and rules at different places. Like, you go to grandma's, you should never ever jump on the couch at grandma's house, but you can jump on the couch at home or whatever it is. And also I think that, for example, what I see sometimes is that maybe at one house, there's a lot less welcoming feelings, and maybe there's a little bit harsher treatment or yelling or whatever. And just really recognize that when your child comes back to you, they might have what we call in peaceful parenting a full emotional backpack, which is like stored up, tensions and emotions in their bodies that they have sort of been holding on to because it wasn't safe to let the feelings out. And they might come back to you a little bit of a wreck, right? Like they might, yeah. If you're their safe home or their safe person, they might need some help in processing those feelings, and lots of crying, lots of laughter to sort of help them get some of that stuff processed out.
Okay. Yeah, thanks very much.
Just encourage, I think the parents, we have to be careful too to not use what's in the kid's backpack against the other parent too.
Yeah, totally.
So we got to be like, that's kind of on us to just make sure we're keeping that clear. Yeah.
Good stuff. Good. Patrick has a situation. I don't know if we can address it here. I'm going to speak it out. If you want to answer it, great. If not, I can fully understand, because I don't think it has 100% to do with discipline. But he says he has not seen his kid very much in the last 2 months. I'm in legal battles with their mother. Do you have any tips for re-engaging with them and ensuring that I care about them and I have not abandoned them? So I don't know if you want to touch that. It's up to you too, because
that's one of those full webinar things we could be focusing on too.
Yeah. That's I was going to suggest there that Patrick reach out to Dad Central. I think we could take that offline, to be fair, because that's a full conversation in itself, and discipline is part of it. But I think if you can reach out and contact the Dad Central, we can certainly have a one-on-one, or one of our representatives can have a one-on-one with you. So I'm going to leave it at that. So let me get something else here. Oh, I am Rit, and I hope I have your name right. If I didn't, it's my head, not my heart. Is what about the silent treatment? Sometimes it's not easy to say anything. What is your suggestion? Thanks.
Well, I think the silent treatment can be, I mentioned before how we get overwhelmed and hijacked and we go into the fight, flight, or freeze. So the yelling would be the fight, and the silent treatment is probably, I'd say it's the freeze. Walking away, going away from your child, that would probably be the flight, and the silent treatment would probably be the freeze. So I think recognizing the silent treatment as also being hijacked by your own, big feelings of overwhelm is a helpful way to look at it. And so you still need to work on regulating your feelings, even if they're not expressing themselves loudly, like with yelling. The silent treatment is another form of being hijacked and having to work on your self-regulation. So still, if you find yourself giving the silent treatment, and love withdrawal is really can affect kids as much as yelling, or maybe even more. I don't know. I mean, maybe scientists have researched that, but love withdrawal is very fearful for children. Do they still love me? Will I survive? Evolutionarily, we have this fear of even our survival if our parents are unhappy with us, right? So I think looking at the silent treatment is just another form of being hijacked, and still using the same stop, drop, and breathe. Take a few deep breaths, reconnect with that your child's doing the best they can. They're not giving you a hard time. They're having a hard time. I think that, hopefully that helps the person who asked the question.
Okay.
And it may be like, maybe for a few minutes, it's less harmful than yelling. But it's still, I think it still would be harmful to a kid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I think, whatever we do with discipline, I think one of the questions to ask ourselves is, what is my child learning here? Are they learning to fear me? Are they learning to be afraid? Are they learning that I turn my back on them? We think they're learning to maybe make a different choice next time, but a lot of times underneath these things, and I think the silent treatment can be one of those things that actually our child may be learning, where does dad go when I need him? Mm-hmm. Kind of thing. He's suddenly silent. He's not saying anything. And so is that something we want our kids to learn? And so I think that question is an important thing for us to ask with all these ideas that we throw around.
Okay. Next question from the audience. How do you empathize when the stresses and pressures of the moment or life come against you?
Well, Sarah, I think you've talked a lot to that kind of stuff, the stop, drop, and breathe kind of thing, and looking after ourselves, getting into a place where we are under control and we are resilient ourselves, so that we can be present that way. You may add some things to that, but I appreciated that.
Just to even take it a little bit further, like giving yourself compassion, that is in such short supply for parents that I work with. Like, they're so hard on themselves. And, I think just even in the moment, like you're dealing with all the stress from work and like all of the things with COVID and, financial worries and like all of the things that are like piling up. And then your child is, being defiant when you're trying to get them out the door in the morning. Just stopping and like giving yourself a little love. Like I like to say, like, put your hand on your heart, take a breath, and just say, of course, this is difficult right now with everything that I have going on and with everything that's going on in the world. Of course, I'm having a hard time. So I guess the question is, how do you give empathy when you're having a hard time? Is you give empathy to yourself first, right? You give yourself empathy first. Because if we can't give ourselves empathy, we cannot give our children empathy, right? Like, it always starts with, you can't be compassionate with your children if you can't be compassionate with yourself. And I think, like, it's a huge problem with parents that they're so hard on themselves, because when we beat ourselves up, we can't do better, right? The only way we can do better, and I'm not saying be compassionate and excuse, like, don't try and do better and, never look at your, difficult moments. But I'm saying, like, when you have those difficult moments, give yourself compassion, because it's out of that love for yourself that you will do better the next time.
And it's interesting, when we started a conversation off, there wasn't many questions. They are like flooding in right now. So I'm not going to have you past the top of the hour, folks, but try to get as many questions as I can in. One of the things, just to add on to what Sarah was saying, two things. Parents, give yourselves grace. And another big thing is, have parenting hang out with other parents and see what is and what isn't working. The support, especially with fathers these days, like I'm very involved in the fatherhood and manhood community. The number of conversations that are happening offline these days is higher than it ever has been. So reach out if it's in you, whether it's your community, online. If you want any resources, again, Dad Central, that's the best place to go. Another good question. Can you go through an example if a 5 or 3-year-old won't obey? Example, screen time is done. It usually turns the kids into yelling and arguing and showing strong emotion.
Well, I would say our goal is not obey. Obedience in a 3 or 5-year-old might seem like really attractive trait, attractive quality, and would make our lives a lot easier. But Brian mentioned self-discipline, and self-discipline doesn't come out of obedience, right? Obedience is discipline from the outside. So we want our kids, we want to be thinking about that in all of our interactions with our kids. So what I talk about a lot with parents is finding a win-win solution. So, first of all, they're allowed to be upset that it's time to stop watching TV. We want to welcome their feelings. I'm so sorry. I know you love watching TV so much. It is time to turn it off. It's the end of the show. Would you like to turn it off, or do you want me to turn it off? Right? You might have to turn the TV there. I don't want anyone to turn it off. No, whatever. Okay, looks like you want me to turn off the TV. I'm going to turn off the TV, and you know what? Let's play a game of chase. Come on, let's go, everybody. And so, finding that win-win solution where they don't, their agenda is to keep watching TV, yours is to turn it off. How can you find something that works for both of you? So maybe they don't get to watch TV anymore, but they do get to play with you, which is really really, I think what is great for building that connection, and what kids really want is our love and attention. So it's not about that you say turn off the TV and they're afraid of you and they jump up and turn off the TV really quickly because they, it's unpredictable what might happen if they don't obey you. But it's about how can you scaffold them to accept your limits by making that, win-win solution of, yes, you can be upset, and we're also going to find something fun to do after we turn off the TV.
Yeah, Sarah, I love everything you're saying. It's just, it's awesome. Yeah, it makes total sense. And one thing that I thought about too is how make sure make sure the child knows what to expect. Like set that limit, or set that ahead of time.
Yeah, so it's like we're going to watch one show, or we're going to watch for half an hour. Not you can watch until I arbitrarily decide that the time is up, and I tell you it's time to turn it off with no warning.
Yeah, that's right.
Last question from the audience. Someone saying, from my experience, most of the dads I met tend to leave the yelling parts to the moms. What's the reason behind that? Is that proven? That's a good question.
I know dads that yell too. So
yeah, in my experience, it's 50-50. Some dads yell more, some moms yell more. But maybe what I see sometimes is the dad gets to be the fun guy. Dad works a lot and then gets home and gets to be the fun guy, and it's mom's job. And again, I don't want to be sexist, but sometimes they do follow along those gender stereotypes that dad gets to play and mom's the one who's like, okay, stop playing. It's time to come and get ready for bed. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Well, I think, and it might be something sort of along those lines too, where in some ways dad might be a bit more of a unique voice than mom. Like if mom spends more time with the kids, moms just tend to be doing more with the kids sort of day to day, even though there's a lot of shared stuff now, but I think it still tends to be where mom's voice is heard more. Right. So when dad's voice is actually heard, there might be a little more instant reaction because it's just a little different. So there's a lot of things at play. There's certainly not one reason why that might be, but that's it's interesting thinking about those things.
Mm-hmm.
Final question: what is your final piece of advice to help dads stay calm and manage your kids' behavior? Any final thoughts?
I just think focus on the relationship, make that your priority. Your needs are not the priority. You have to look after your needs, but ultimately it's what's good for the kids in this, and ask yourself a lot, what does my child need to be learning from this situation right now?
I love that. I also think about, rather than managing their behavior, how can we work with them? to help them meet our expectations, because we all have expectations for our kids, and there's nothing wrong with having expectations. But the old school parenting is, you will be my expectations or else, right? Like there was a fear, that fear-based discipline, that fear-based component. And there was no support to meet the expectations. It was just, you better do it, right? But what we think about in peaceful parenting is like, you still have the expectations, you still have those high expectations for your kids, but what support do they need to meet your expectations? I gave an example of it with turning off the TV. Whether it's physical support, it looks like you need a little help turning the TV off, or whether it's emotional support, like, geez, I know you really don't want to turn it off. You love watching TV so much. I think just completely shifting that paradigm. It's like not getting them to behave, is working with them to meet your expectations.
Wonderful. Well, that is it, folks. Sarah, I'd like to say thank you for dropping the knowledge bombs today. You were fantastic. If people want to find out anything more or contact you, how can they do that?
My website is sarah.rosensweet.com, and there's lots of ways to work with me there. And also, I have a free Facebook group that's called Peaceful Parenting with Sarah Rosensweet. If any of the dads, it's not just for moms, there are dads on there too. And if any dads would like some support from other parents, or they want to learn more about peaceful parenting and they're on Facebook, that's also a good place to find me.
Much thanks, Brian. As always, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Any contact? Yeah, always a pleasure. And Brian isn't directly involved with Dad Central, but we're not letting him go. Let's put it that way. we got reins on him at all costs. So Brian, again, stop it now. So I just want to thank, first of all, everyone who came out and watched this. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your involvement. And we're wishing you great parenting. It is not easy, but just work on getting a little bit better each day. If you have any further questions, certainly go to the website, dadcentral.ca, and there's a lot of stuff there to help you.